Jaewon woke to the sound of soft humming and the gentle glow of bioluminescent lights above his bed. He tried to move, but his body refused to obey in pain. Radiated from his chest with every breath he took. "Do not try to sit up," said a familiar voice. "You nearly died and your body needs time to heal." He turned his head slowly and saw Mira sitting beside his bed with a datapad in her lap. "How long?" he managed to ask. 12 days, Myra replied. "The healers did not think you would survive the first night, but you are stubborn for a human." Jaewon closed his eyes and tried to remember what had happened. The grand assembly and the announcement, and then the flash of an energy weapon and the feeling of fire burning through his chest. The beige and dur announcement, and then the flash of an energy weapon and the flash of an energy weapon and the feeling of fire burning through his chest. "The Queen," he said suddenly. "Is she safe?" "She is unharmed thanks to you, Commander." The door to his chamber opened, and Queen Nasara Vin entered with 2 guards behind her. She dismissed them with a gesture and walked to his bedside, where Myra rose and bowed before stepping away. "Leave us, sister," the Queen said, and Mira nodded and left the room without a word. Tessera. Vin looked down at Jaewon with an expression he could not read. "You threw yourself in front of an energy blast meant for me." "I did. Why would you do such a thing for someone you barely know?" Jaewon thought about the question carefully before he answered. "Because you are the only hope for peace between our peoples, Your Majesty, and because I made a promise to carry your burdens as you carry mine. That promise did not require you to die for me, Commander." "No, but it felt like the right thing to do." The Queen was silent for a long moment, and then she did something that surprised him completely. She sat down on the edge of his bed and took one of his hands in 2 of hers. The assassin was a general named Krath Voss, who believed that peace with humans was a betrayal of everyone who died in the war. He has been arrested, and he will face justice for what he did, but he was not acting alone. Jaewon felt his heart sink because he knew what was coming. "We have discovered that the assassination was planned by elements on both sides of the war. Selvari who profit from the conflict and human corporations that sell weapons and supplies to both governments. They have been working together to ensure that peace never comes, including the corporation that destroyed the Temple 11 years ago." Jaewon closed his eyes and felt the weight of this revelation settle over him. So the war was never really about revenge or territory. It was about money. In part, yes, the Queen agreed. But it was also about fear and hatred, and the lies the powerful people tell to maintain their power. "What do we do now?" The Queen squeezed his hand gently. "We do what we promised to do, Commander. We build peace despite those who would stop us, and we expose the truth until there are no more lies left to hide behind." Over the following weeks, Jaewon recovered slowly under the care of Selvari healers who used techniques that human medicine had never imagined. News of his sacrifice spread across both human and Selvari space, and public opinion shifted dramatically in favor of peace. People on both sides were tired of war, and the image of a human throwing himself in front of an energy blast to save an alien queen was more powerful than any speech or propaganda. The corporations and officials who had profited from the war were exposed and arrested, and their fortunes were seized to pay reparations to the victims on both sides. 6 months after the assassination attempt, Jaewon stood in the treaty hall on the neutral world of Varus 7 and watched as Queen Nasara Vin and the new president of Earth signed the Varith Accords. The war was officially over. Reparations would flow in both directions, and joint colonies would be established where humans and Selvari could live and work together. A new era was beginning, and Jaewon had helped to create it. After the signing ceremony, the Queen found him standing on a balcony that overlooked the first joint human Selvari settlement. Families from both species were moving into homes that had been built by workers of both kinds, and children were already playing together in the streets below. "You seem thoughtful, Commander," The queen observed as she came to stand beside him. I am thinking about everything that has happened, Jae-won admitted, and everything that is still to come. Do you regret any of it? He shook his head slowly. I regret the lives that were lost and the years that were wasted, but I do not regret the path that brought us here. The queen was silent for a moment, and then she spoke again. I have a gift for you, Commander Yoon Jae-won. Your Majesty, you have given me more than I could ever repay. This is not a gift that can be repaid, because it is a gift of trust. She turned to face him, and her golden patterns glowed brightly beneath her obsidian skin. I am offering you a place on my advisory council as my permanent ambassador from humanity. It is a position that has never been held by anyone who was not born. Selvari. Jae-won stared at her in shock because he had not expected anything like this. Your Majesty, I am honored. Beyond words, but surely there are others who are better qualified. There is no one better qualified than you, Commander. You have proven your commitment to peace with your words and your actions and your blood. You have earned the trust of my people and the respect of your own. And you have shown me that humans are capable of far more than I ever believed possible. She extended one of her 4 hands toward him in a gesture of formal invitation. Will you accept? Jae-won looked at her outstretched hand and thought about everything he had been through to reach this moment. He thought about the desperate gambit that had started with an ancient ritual and a transmission sent against Ors. He thought about the 30 days he had spent learning to see the Selvari as people rather than enemies. He thought about the truth he had shared and the lies he had helped to destroy. And he thought about the future that was now possible, because 2 peoples had chosen to carry each other's burdens instead of adding to them. He reached out and took the queen's hand in his own. I accept, Your Majesty. The Saravin smiled, and her dark eyes held a warmth that he had come to treasure over the past months. Then welcome to the Council Ambassador Yoon Jae-won. They stood together on the balcony and watched the sun set over the new colony below. I have one question, Jae-won said after a while. Ask it. When I sent that first proposal, did you ever consider simply rejecting it? The queen laughed softly, and the sound was like music in the evening air. I considered many things, Commander, but rejection was never truly among them. Why not? Because you proposed an end to bloodshed, and I simply answered in kind. Your people call my answer shocking, but mine call it the only answer worth giving. Jae-won smiled and felt something he had not felt in many years. He felt hope, not just for himself, but for all the children of both species who would grow up in a galaxy where peace was possible and 2 peoples who had once been enemies could learn to be something more. The war was over, but the work was just beginning, and Jae-won was ready to do his part. He had proposed to an alien queen, and her answer had changed everything. Now it was time to build the future they had promised each other and prove that even the most desperate gambit could lead to something beautiful. The stars were waiting, and together they would reach for them. The transmission reached Earth 3 days later, and the reaction was everything Jae-won had feared and hoped for. At the same time, news reports showed crowds gathering in cities across human space as people demanded answers from their governments. Some called Jae-won a hero for revealing the truth, while others called him a traitor for siding with the enemy. Politicians scrambled to respond, and several high-ranking officials resigned rather than face questions about what they had known and when they had known it. The corporation responsible for the massacre was investigated, and its executives were arrested on charges of crimes against sentient beings. But not everyone accepted the truth, and there were many who refused to believe that humans could have done something so terrible. Protests erupted on both sides of the debate, and for a few tense days, it seemed like humanity might tear itself apart over the revelation. Jae-won watched it all from Kethvara and felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him like a physical force. He had started this chain of events with a single transmission, and now he could only watch as the consequences unfolded on The 28th day of his stay, Mira found him standing alone in the memorial of the first betrayal. She did not speak at first, but simply stood beside him and looked out at the names carved into the stone. "My mother's name is on this wall," she said finally. Joan turned to look at her in surprise because she had never shared anything personal with him before. She was a priestess at the temple, and she died with the others when the caverns collapsed. "I am so sorry, Myra." She shook her head slowly. "I hated humans for a very long time, Commander, and I was not happy when my sister asked me to be your guide. But you have surprised me." She turned to face him, and her expression was softer than he had ever seen it. "You wept for my people when you learned the truth, and you risked everything to share that truth with your own kind. That is not what I expected from a human." "We are not all the same," Jaewon said. "Just as your people are not all the same." "No," Myra agreed. "We are not." She reached out with one of her 4 hands and touched his arm gently. "I think perhaps there is hope for our 2 peoples after all." They stood together in silence for a while, and for the first time since arriving on Kethvara, Jaewon did not feel like a stranger on the 30th day. Jaewon was summoned to the Queen's private chambers. He walked through corridors that had become familiar to him over the past month, and he nodded to guards who no longer watched him with suspicion. The door to the Queen's chambers opened, and he stepped inside to find the Saravin standing by a window that overlooked the glowing forest below. She was alone, and she did not turn when he entered. "Close the door, Commander." Jaewon did as she asked, and waited in silence for her to speak. 30 days ago, you invoked the right of eternal binding and proposed that we merge our bloodlines rather than spill blood. I have thought about your proposal every day since then, and I have watched you carefully during your time here. She turned to face him, and her dark eyes held an intensity that made his heart beat faster. "I have seen you learn our language and struggle to understand our customs. I have seen you weep for the victims of a massacre committed by your own people. I have seen you sacrifice your career and your safety to give your people the truth they needed to hear, and I have reached my decision." Jaewon held his breath as she walked toward him and stopped only a few feet away. "My answer is not what you expect, Commander Yoon Jaewon. Among my people, the right of eternal binding is not truly about marriage as humans understand it. It is about 2 souls agreeing to carry each other's burdens forever. It is the heaviest commitment one can make, and it is not given lightly." She reached out with all 4 of her hands and placed them on his shoulders and arms in a gesture that felt both formal and intimate. "I accept your proposal, Commander, but not as your wife." Jaewon stared at her in confusion because he had not expected this answer at all. "I accept you as my partner in ending this war. You will carry my people's pain, and I will carry yours. We will build something together that neither of our species has ever seen. A true peace built on truth and mutual understanding rather than fear and exhaustion." Jaewon felt tears forming in his eyes again, but this time they were not tears of grief. "Your Majesty, I do not know what to say." "Say yes, Commander, and mean it." "Yes," he said without hesitation. "I accept." The Queen smiled, and it was the first time he had seen such an expression on her face. "Then tomorrow we will announce to both our peoples that the war is over and that peace negotiations will begin. You will represent humanity as its ambassador to the Solvari Dominion, and I will answer for my people. Together, we will find a path forward." The next morning, Jaewon stood beside Queen Saravin in the Grand Assembly Hall of Kethvara. Thousands of Solvari nobles and officials filled the chamber, and holographic projectors carried the scene to every corner of the Dominion and every human world that was willing to receive it. The Queen spoke first and announced that she had accepted a proposal of peace from a human representative. She explained the right of eternal binding and what it meant for 2 peoples to agree to carry each other's burdens. She declared that the war was over and that formal negotiations would begin immediately. Reaction in the hall was immediate and chaotic. Some Selvari cheered while others shouted in protest, and several of the Queen's advisors looked like they wanted to object, but did not dare. Then something happened that Jaewon did not expect. A figure emerged from the crowd with a weapon raised and aimed directly at the Queen. Time seemed to slow down as Jaewon recognized the energy pistol for what it was and understood what was about to happen. Did not think about what he was doing, and he did not hesitate for even a moment. He threw himself in front of the Queen. Just as the weapon fired, the energy blast struck him in the chest, and pain exploded through his body like nothing he had ever felt before. He heard screaming and shouting as he fell, and he felt strong arms catch him before he hit the ground. He looked up and saw the Queen's face above him, with her dark eyes wide with shock and her golden patterns flashing wildly beneath her skin. "Why?" she asked, and her voice was barely a whisper. "Because peace is worth dying for," Jaewon managed to say before the darkness took him. The last thing he felt was the Queen's 4 arms holding him close, as if she could keep his life from slipping away through sheer force of will. The last thing he heard was her voice shouting for healers and demanding that someone save this human who had given everything for a chance at peace. And then there was nothing but silence and shadow, and the distant hope that his sacrifice had not been in vain. The first week on Kethvara was the hardest for Jaewon because everything was strange and nothing made sense. Counselor Myra Vin was not a kind guide, and she made no effort to hide her distrust of humans. She answered his questions with short replies, and she watched him constantly as if expecting him to reveal some hidden threat. But she followed her Queen's orders faithfully, and she took Jaewon to every place he asked to see. He visited the markets where Selvari merchants sold goods made from materials he had never encountered. He walked through the gardens where children played games that involved all 4 of their arms moving in patterns too complex for human eyes to follow. He sat in the Hall of Ancestors, where the names of every Selvari who had ever lived were carved into walls that stretched for miles. And slowly as the days passed, Jaewon began to understand that the Selvari were not the monsters that human propaganda had made them out to be. They were people with families and dreams and fears just like humans. They loved their children and honored their elders and created art that made Jaewon's heart ache with its beauty. On the 10th day, Mira brought him to a place that changed everything. It was a memorial built on a hillside overlooking the capital city, and it was covered with names carved in the flowing Selvari script. "This is the memorial of the first betrayal," Mira said, and for the first time, her voice held something other than coldness. "What happened here?" Jaewon asked. Mira was silent for a moment, and then she began to speak in a tone that was heavy with old grief. 11 years ago, there was a sacred site on a moon called Vareth Prime, where our people had gathered for a holy pilgrimage that happens only once every 50 years. Over 40,000 Selvari were there, including priests and families and children, who had come to witness the sacred lights that appeared in the sky above the temple. Jaewon felt a cold knot forming in his stomach, because he had never heard this story before. A human mining corporation had been operating nearby, and they wanted access to the resources beneath the temple site. But our people refused to leave because the site was sacred. Myra's voice grew harder as she continued. The corporation decided to remove us by force, and they detonated explosives that collapsed the caverns beneath the temple. 40,000 Selvari died in minutes, including children and priests and pilgrims who had traveled across the stars to witness something beautiful. She turned to look at Jaewon, and her dark eyes were filled with pain that had not faded after more than a decade. Our government believed it was a military attack authorized by your leaders, and they struck back against human colonies in response. That is how this war began, Commander, with the murder of innocents by those who valued profit over life. Jaewon could not speak because his throat had closed up and his eyes were burning with tears. He could not stop. He had spent 11 years believing that the Salvari had started this war through unprovoked aggression. He had watched friends die in battles that he thought were fought in defense of humanity, and now he was learning that it had all begun with a crime committed by his own people. I did not know, he said finally, and his voice came out as a broken whisper. No, Myra replied, most humans do not know because your government buried the truth and blamed us for what followed. She watched him carefully, as if judging his reaction. Do you believe me, Commander? Jaewon thought about lying or making excuses or defending his people, but he could not do any of those things. I believe you, he said, and I want to see the evidence. Myra seemed surprised by his answer, but she nodded slowly. I will take you to the archives tomorrow, and you can see for yourself. That night, Jaewon did not sleep because he was reading through the documents that Mira had given him access to. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The corporation had destroyed the temple deliberately, and they had falsified records to make it look like an accident. Human military intelligence had discovered the truth within months, but they had chosen to keep it secret because the war was already popular, and politicians did not want to admit that humanity was the aggressor. Jaewon wept alone in his quarters for the first time since his wife had died 5 years ago. He wept for the 40,000 Salvari who had died for corporate greed. He wept for all the soldiers on both sides who had given their lives for a lie, and he wept for himself because everything he had believed about this war was wrong. The next morning, he requested an audience with Queen. The Tsarevich received him in her private garden where flowers that glowed with inner light grew around a pool of water so clear that it seemed to have no bottom. You have been crying, the Queen observed, and there was no judgment in her voice. I read the archives, Jaewon said, and I know now how this war truly began. Does this knowledge change your proposal, Commander? No, Your Majesty. It strengthens it, because now I understand that peace is not just possible but necessary. He knelt before her even though the rite did not require it. I want to transmit the evidence to Earth so that my people can know the truth. I want them to understand what was done in their name, and I want to give them the chance to choose a different path. The Queen looked down at him with an expression he could not interpret. You know that this will make you a traitor in the eyes of many humans. Yes, you know that your government may imprison you or execute you for revealing their secrets. Yes, and yet you still wish to do this. Jaewon looked up at her and met her dark eyes without flinching. The truth is more important than my life. Your Majesty and my people deserve to know what has been done in their name. The Queen was silent for a long moment, and then she reached down with one of her 4 hands and touched his shoulder gently. Rise, Commander Yoon Jae-won. He stood and found that she was looking at him with something that might have been respect. I will grant your request, and you may transmit the evidence to your people. Thank you, Your Majesty. Do not thank me yet, Commander, because what comes next will be harder than anything you have faced before. She turned and walked deeper into the garden, and Jaewon followed her. My sister tells me that you have been learning our language and our customs with great dedication. I am trying, Your Majesty. She also tells me that you played with the children in the market district yesterday, and that you made them laugh even though you could barely understand their words. Jaewon felt his face grow warm with embarrassment. They were kind enough to teach me a game, and I was not very good at it. The Queen stopped and looked back at him over her shoulder. Mira said something else. About you, Commander, and it is why I have decided to trust you with this chance. What did she say? She said that you are broken in the way our own veterans are broken, and that your pain is real. The Queen's golden patterns shifted beneath her skin. In a slow wave, among my people, that is considered the highest compliment one can give to a former enemy. It means that you have earned your suffering honestly, and that you carry it with dignity. Jaewon did not know what to say to that, so he simply bowed his head in acknowledgement. Go and send your message, Commander, and we will see what grows from the seeds of truth. Jaewon spent the rest of that day composing the most important transmission of his life. He attached every piece of evidence he had found, and he wrote a message to the people of Earth, asking them to see the Selvari not as monsters, but as victims who had been wronged. He sent the transmission, knowing that it would change everything, and then he waited to see if the truth would set his people free or tear them apart. The Selvari shuttle that carried Jaewon through space was unlike any human vessel he had ever seen. The walls seemed to breathe with a soft rhythm, and the seats molded themselves to his body as if they were alive. His Selvari escort consisted of 6 warriors who stood motionless around him, with their forearms folded across their broad chests. They had not spoken a single word to him since he boarded, and their dark eyes watched him with an expression he could not read. Jaewon spent the journey studying everything he could see and trying to learn what he could about the people he hoped to make peace with. The shuttle descended through clouds of purple and gold and emerged above a world that stole his breath away. HFY was beautiful beyond anything he had imagined. Forests of bioluminescent trees stretched across vast continents, and their glow painted the night side of the planet in shades of blue and green and silver. Crystalline spires rose from the ground like frozen lightning, and they caught the light of the twin suns and scattered it into rainbows. The capital city was not built but grown, and every tower and bridge and walkway seemed to flow naturally from the living rock beneath. The shuttle landed on a platform of polished stone, and Jaewon stepped out into air that smelled of flowers he had never encountered. His guards led him through corridors of living material that pulsed with gentle light, and past windows that looked out over gardens where strange creatures moved among the plants. Selvari citizens stopped to stare at him as he passed, and he saw surprise and curiosity, and sometimes hatred in their alien faces. He could not blame them for the hatred, because his people had been killing theirs for 11 years. Finally, the guards brought him to a massive door that seemed to be carved from a single piece of black crystal. The door opened without a sound, and Jaewon walked into the throne room of Queen. The Saravinth chamber was vast and filled with shadows that moved on their own as if they were alive. Pillars of twisted organic material rose from the floor to support a ceiling so high that it disappeared into darkness, and at the far end of the room, upon a throne that looked like it had grown from the bones of the planet itself, sat the Queen. Jaewon had seen images of the Saravinth, but none of them had prepared him for the reality of her presence. She was 7 feet tall, even while sitting, and her 4 arms rested on the armrests of her throne with casual grace. Her skin was like polished obsidian, and patterns of gold moved beneath its surface like rivers of molten metal. Her eyes were large and dark, and filled with an intelligence that made Jaewon feel as if she could see every thought in his mind. She wore no crown, but she did not need one, because her authority radiated from her like heat from a star. Round her stood advisors and generals and nobles, who all turned to look at Jaewon with expressions ranging from contempt to curiosity. The Queen raised one hand, and the room fell silent. "Leave us," she said in a voice that was deep and musical, and left no room for argument. Advisors hesitated, and several of them began to protest, but one look from the Queen silenced them all. They filed out of the throne room with obvious reluctance, and the great doors closed behind them. Jaewon was alone with the most powerful being in the Selvari dominion. "Come closer, human," the Queen said. Jaewon walked forward until he stood at the base of the steps that led up to her throne. He did not kneel, because the texts had said that one who invokes the right stands as an equal before the one they proposed to. The Queen studied him for a long moment, and her golden patterns shifted beneath her skin in ways that might have been amusement or annoyance or something else entirely. "You are not what I expected," she said finally. "What did you expect, Your Majesty? A warrior, perhaps, or a politician seeking advantage through an ancient custom that most of my people have forgotten?" She leaned forward slightly, and her dark eyes seemed to pierce straight through him. But you are neither of those things, are you? Commander Yoon Jae-won. I was a soldier once, Jae-won admitted. But I grew tired of killing, and now I seek other ways to serve my people. And you believe that proposing marriage to an alien queen is a way to serve them. I believe that opening a door is a way to serve them. Your Majesty, and the right was the only door I could find. The queen was silent for several seconds, and then she did something that surprised Jae-won completely. She laughed. It was not a mocking laugh or a cruel one, but a genuine sound of amusement that echoed through the empty throne room. You are honest, she said. That is rare among diplomats of any species. She rose from her throne and descended the steps until she stood before him, and Jae-won had to crane his neck to look up at her face. I know that your proposal was not authorized by your government commander, and I know that you have probably destroyed your career by sending it. Jae-won nodded, because there was no point in denying what she clearly already knew. Why did you do it? She asked. Why would you sacrifice everything for a gesture that most humans would call absurd? Jae-won thought about the question carefully before he answered. 3 years ago, I was on a planet called Kepler 442b when your forces attacked a human colony there. The Queen's expression did not change, but something shifted in her eyes. I was evacuating civilians when the fighting reached us, and I thought we were all going to die that day. But then something happened that I have never forgotten. He paused to gather his thoughts, and the Queen waited patiently for him to continue. A group of Selvari soldiers found us hiding in a building with 30 human children, and instead of killing us, they carried those children to safety behind their own lines and kept them there until the fighting stopped. The Queen was very still now, and her golden patterns had stopped moving entirely. I asked one of the soldiers why they had done it, and he said that the Queen had forbidden harm to enemy children, no matter the circumstances. Jae-won met her eyes directly, even though every instinct told him to look away from such an intense gaze. That is when I knew that your people are not monsters, Your Majesty, and I believe that you are not a monster either. I believe that somewhere in all of this, there is a way for our two peoples to stop killing each other, and I believe that you want to find that way just as much as I do. The Queen did not respond for a long time, and the silence stretched between them like a living thing. Finally, she spoke, and her voice was softer than before. You are a strange human, Commander Yoon Jae-won. She turned and walked back to her throne, but she did not sit down. I will give you my answer to your proposal in 30 days, and until then, you will remain here on Kethvora as my guest. You will learn what it truly means to be Selvari, and you will see my people as they truly are, not as enemies across a battlefield. And when the 30 days have passed, I will tell you whether there is any hope for the peace you seek. Jae-won bowed his head in acceptance of her terms. Thank you, Your Majesty. The Queen made a gesture, and the doors opened to admit a young Selvari female who bore a striking resemblance to the Queen herself. This is my youngest sister, Counselor Myra Vin, and she will be your guide during your time here. Myra looked at Jae-won with undisguised suspicion, but she nodded respectfully to her queen. Come, human, Myra said. I will show you to your quarters. Jae-won followed her out of the throne room and felt the Queen's eyes on his back until the doors closed behind him. Had come here hoping for a simple answer to his proposal, but he was beginning to realize that he had stumbled into something far more complex than he had ever imagined. Commander Yoon Jae-won stood alone in his quarters aboard the diplomatic vessel Horizon's Edge and stared at the classified report on his screen for the 5th time that hour. The numbers had not changed 6 months until the Selvari Dominion launched their final offensive against Earth's outer colonies, and there was nothing humanity could do to stop it. 11 years of war had drained both sides dry, but the Selvari had deeper reserves and more ships, and they were done waiting for humanity to surrender. Jae-won closed his eyes and thought about his daughter back on Earth, who was now 16 years old, and had spent most of her life knowing only war. He thought about the colonies on the outer rim, where millions of families lived in fear of the sky turning bright with enemy fire. He thought about all the peace talks he had attended over the past 7 years, and how every single one had failed. The Selvari would not negotiate and humanity could not win, and that was the simple truth. That kept Jaewon awake most nights, but tonight was different because tonight, Jaewon had found something in the old archives that nobody else had bothered to read. He pulled up the file again and studied the ancient Selvari text that had taken him 3 weeks to translate with the help of captured documents and old linguistic databases. The rite of eternal binding it was a custom so old that most Selvari had forgotten it existed, and it had not been invoked in over 4,000 years. According to the text, a marriage proposal from an enemy was considered the highest form of respect in ancient Selvari culture. It was an offer to merge bloodlines rather than spill blood, and it demanded a formal response from the one who received it to ignore. Such a proposal was considered the greatest dishonor, and no Selvari ruler had ever refused to at least hear the words of one who invoked it. Raijuan knew this was insane. He knew that his superiors at Earth High Command would call him a fool, or worse if they found out what he was planning. But he also knew something else that most humans did not understand about the Selvari. Their queen was different. Queen the Sara Vin had risen to power 8 years ago through a bloodless coup that removed her predecessor without a single death. She had restructured the Dominion's military to reduce civilian casualties, and she had never personally ordered an attack on human non-combatants. Juan had studied her for years, and he believed that somewhere beneath the armor of her position there was someone who wanted this war to end just as much as he did. He just needed to find a way to reach her that bypassed all the advisors and generals and politicians who surrounded her. The rite of eternal binding was that way. Jaewon stood up from his desk and walked to the communication console at the center of his quarters. His hands trembled slightly as he began to compose the message. He followed every protocol he had found in the ancient texts and used every formal phrase and traditional greeting that the rite required. He addressed Queen the Sara Vin by her full ceremonial title, and he stated his name and rank in homeworld as the texts demanded. Then he wrote the words that would either save humanity or destroy his career forever. I, Yoon Jae-won of Earth, do invoke the rite of eternal binding and offer myself to Queen the Sara Vin of the Selvari Dominion as proof that our two peoples need not destroy each other. I ask only for the chance to speak and to be heard. He read the message 3 times and then pressed the transmit button before he could change his mind. Signal left his ship and raced across space toward the Selvari flagship that waited at the edge of the contested zone. Jaewon sat down heavily in his chair and waited. He did not have to wait long. Within 2 hours, the door to his quarters burst open, and 4 armed soldiers from his own ship rushed inside. With their weapons raised behind them stood Admiral Chin Sion with fury burning in her eyes. Commander Yoon, she said in a voice that could have frozen water, do you have any idea what you have done? Jaewon rose to his feet and faced her calmly, even though his heart was pounding in his chest. I have invoked an ancient Selvari custom that requires Queen the Sara Vin to respond to my proposal, he said. I have opened a door that diplomacy could not open. You have committed treason, Admiral Chun replied. You sent an unauthorized communication to the enemy ruler without approval from high command, and you did it using some ridiculous ancient ritual that nobody has ever heard of. The Selvari have heard of it, Jaewon said. That is what matters. Admiral Chun stepped closer to him and her voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You will be court-martialed for this, Commander, and when they find you guilty, you will spend the rest of your life in a military prison, while the rest of us deal with the mess you have created. Jaewon did not argue because he knew she was right about the court-martial, had broken every regulation in the book, and he had done it with full knowledge of the consequences. But He also knew something that Admiral Chun did not know yet. The Selvari had already responded. A junior officer appeared in the doorway with a pale face and a datapad clutched in her shaking hands. "Admiral," she said, "we have received a transmission from the Selvari flagship, and it is addressed to Commander Yoon." Admiral Chun snatched the datapad from the officer's hands and read the message with narrowing eyes. Her expression changed from anger to confusion to something that looked almost like fear. "What does it say?" Jaewon asked quietly. Admiral Chung looked up at him, and for the first time since he had known her, she seemed at a loss for words. "It says the Queen will see the human and that you are to come alone." The room fell silent as everyone processed what this meant. The Selvari Queen had not rejected the proposal, and she had not laughed at it or ignored it. She had invited Jaewon to meet her face to face. "This is a trap," Admiral Chen said, but her voice lacked conviction. "They will kill you the moment you set foot on their ship." "No," Jaewon replied. "The right forbids violence against one who invokes it until a formal response has been given, and the Zaravin has never broken Selvari law. You are betting your life on the honor of an alien queen. I am betting all of our lives, Admiral, because if I'm wrong, we lose one. Commander, but if I am right, we might end this war." Admiral Chun stared at him for a long moment and then shook her head slowly. "You are either the bravest man I have ever met or the most foolish. But either way, I cannot stop you now." She turned to the soldiers who still had their weapons trained on Jaewon. "Stand down and prepare a shuttle for Commander Yoon." The soldiers hesitated but then lowered their weapons and filed out of the room. Admiral Chun paused at the doorway and looked back at Jaewon. "Was time. If you die out there, Commander, I will make sure they remember you as a hero rather than a traitor." "And if I succeed," Jaewon asked, "then I will personally apologize for every harsh word I have ever said to you." She left without another word, and Jaewon was alone again. He walked to the viewport and stared out at the stars that separated him from the Selvari throne world. Somewhere out there, a queen was waiting for him, and she held the fate of two civilizations in her four hands. Jaewon took a deep breath and prepared himself for the journey that would either save his people or doom them all. He had made his gambit, and now he would see it through to the end, whatever that end might be.